Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and today I'm actually bringing back a video idea from last season in which I take a look at team and player salaries in the NBA and come up with some crazy facts that will surprise many of you. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's begin with a few players that are making a ton of money this season, even more than players at similar positions that are clearly better at basketball. For example, Ryan Anderson of the Phoenix Suns makes a little over $20 million this year, while Aaron Gordon of the Magic just signed a shiny new deal this summer that pays him around $21.5 million. Both of those numbers are significantly higher than the $17.4 million that three-time All-Star and 2017 Defensive Player of the Year Draymond Green makes, despite neither Gordon nor Anderson being named an All-Star so far in their careers. But they aren't alone. Heat guard Tyler Johnson is getting a huge pay raise this season, all the way up to over $19 million, courtesy of a poison pill offer sheet from the Brooklyn Nets a few summers ago that the Heat ultimately matched, while Zach LaVine just signed a big deal to return to the Chicago Bulls that pays him $19.5 million. Both of those numbers are higher than the salaries of 2018 All-Star guards Goran Dragic, Kemba Walker, John Wall, and Klay Thompson. And you guessed it, neither of the guys I mentioned earlier have made an All-Star team to this point in their careers. And last up, a few shining members of the NBA's all-overpaid team, Nicholas Batum and Chandler Parsons. Each of them are making over $24 million this coming season and are coming off of injury-riddled and relatively unproductive seasons for their respective teams. Meanwhile, an equally injury-riddled and unproductive player from last season makes less than them this year, but is also a former Finals MVP and first-team All-NBA selection, Kawhi Leonard. Yep, the Grizzlies and Hornets are paying more this season for the likely 90 or so combined games played of Parsons and Batum than the Raptors are paying for, when healthy, a top 5 player in the entire league. Next up, let's talk about where the league was in terms of salaries 10 years ago in the 2008-2009 season compared to this season. Keep in mind that this is without adjusting for inflation. That year, Kevin Garnett was by far the highest paid player in the league at over $24.5 million. The next closest were Jason Kidd and Jermaine O'Neal at around $21 million. This year, Garnett's league-high salary from 10 seasons ago would put him outside the top 20 in player salaries, behind Otto Porter Jr., Andrew Wiggins, and Hassan Whiteside. That same season, there were only 9 players in the entire league making more than $20 million, while this year there are over 40 players making at least that much. Not only that, but there are over 20 players making more than $25 million this season compared to 0 back in the 2008-2009 season, while over 120 players are making more than $10 million this season and only 59 were a decade ago. Lastly, 10 years ago, the salary cap was $58.6 million. Keep in mind that was the total amount teams were expected to pay to fill out their entire roster if they didn't want to go over the cap. This year, the team with the highest payroll in the entire league, the Miami Heat, are paying nearly 3 times that, at around $163 million. So we all know that not only are the Golden State Warriors huge title favorites this season, but that there's also a tremendous financial price to pay for such a talented roster. The Warriors are second in total payroll at around $150 million, about $13 million less than the Miami Heat. But if you only took the salaries of Golden State's 4 best healthy players, I'm not including DeMarcus Cousins in this, Steph Curry at $37.5 million, KD at $30 million, Klay at right around $19 million, and Draymond at right around $17.5, those 4 players by themselves are making more money this year than the entire payroll of the Sacramento Kings, the lowest team payroll in the league, and the only team paying less than $100 million in player salaries this season at less than $94.5 million. Speaking of all the team payrolls in the entire league, those numbers are obviously gigantic by themselves. But what about when you combine them all? What is the league-wide bill for player salaries in terms of players on NBA rosters at the beginning of the 2018-19 NBA season? Well, if you add up the player salaries of all 30 teams, it comes out to over $3.7 billion. That's billion with a B. That's an astonishingly high number and doesn't even include any of the luxury tax payments for teams over $127 million in player salaries, of which 12 teams are subject to at the moment. Next up, you know I have to talk about the newest Laker and biggest player move of the offseason, LeBron James. Much was made of the Lakers' strategy of building around LeBron with largely younger guys and career role players rather than bringing in another star right away. But the interesting thing to me is how the payroll of his new team compares to that of his old team. Despite James's over $30 million salary coming off the books this offseason, the Cavaliers still have a top 20 team payroll at around $121 million, inflated by the contracts of guys like George Hill, Tristan Thompson, J.R. Smith, and Jordan Clarkson. The Lakers, on the other hand, despite spending big in free agency, have the third lowest payroll in the league at around $106 million, nearly $15 million lower than Cleveland's. Having guys on rookie contracts and cheap veterans helps them a lot, but even then, the difference between the two teams really surprised me, given how their respective seasons are projected to turn out. Moving on now to a few players that, in a weird coincidence, are making the exact same amount of money this season. And pretty often these are guys in completely different tiers in terms of quality of player within their own position. For example, Andrew Wiggins and Joel Embiid, each of which have since signed rookie scale max contracts after being drafted in the top 3 of the same 2014 NBA draft, each making the exact same $25.46 million this season, despite Wiggins being a perennial disappointment from a actually watching the basketball games perspective rather than a statistical one, and Embiid being arguably a top 2 or 3 player at his position. To be fair, Embiid's contract is structured so that only around $25 million of it is guaranteed due to his injury history, while Wiggins is guaranteed over $145 million and has only missed 1 game so far in his NBA career. Moving on, what about a trio of top 10 picks from the 2012 NBA draft that have each been named to at least one All-Star team in their careers so far? Bradley Beal, Andre Drummond, and Anthony Davis. Each of them make the same $25.43 million for this upcoming season that Hassan Whiteside does this year. You heard that right, for the same price the Heat are paying for Whiteside, the Pelicans are getting Anthony Davis. Now once again, to be fair, Whiteside was thought of much more highly this time last year, but his sluggish play, especially in the playoffs last year, hasn't endeared him to many fans, and lazy workout videos of him chucking up threes and a disinterested attitude so far in the preseason aren't helping his case much at all. Moving on now, let's talk about a handful of teams that have positioned themselves either very well or very poorly in terms of player payroll compared to how their teams performed last season. Among teams that didn't make the playoffs a year ago, the Detroit Pistons and Memphis Grizzlies have the highest payrolls at $128 and $126 million respectively. Those are the 10th and 11th highest payroll numbers in the league, both of which exceed the luxury tax, and both teams employ a player in the top 10 in league salary for this coming season, Blake Griffin for Detroit and Mike Conley for Memphis. And once again, neither of them made the postseason a year ago. On the other hand, among teams that did make the playoffs a year ago, the Philadelphia 76ers have the lowest payroll coming into this season at $108 million. They only have one player making more than $20 million this season, and that is Joel Embiid, followed by Wilson Chandler and JJ Redick at around $12.5 million. The next lowest payroll for this season among playoff teams from last year is the Indiana Pacers at nearly $110 million. And to get to the first Western Conference team with a low payroll to have made the postseason a year ago, you'd have to go all the way up to the New Orleans Pelicans at around $118.5 million. And last up, let's talk about the NBA salary cap. As of right now, there is exactly one team below the around $102 million salary cap for this season, and that's the Sacramento Kings. All 29 other teams in the league are over the cap. There are a number of reasons for this, but a pretty big one is the fact that there are still a lot of big contracts from the 2015 and 2016 off seasons that are keeping those payroll numbers high, but many of those are set to come off the books in the summer of 2019. And as a result, despite the Kings being the only team currently under the cap, over half the league is expected to be under the projected $109 million salary cap in the summer of 2019, with over 10 of those teams currently on pace to have over $20 million in cap room to spend that summer if they so choose. 9 of those teams, as you can see on screen, will have at least one max contract spot available, and some will have even more space left over after that. So as I've said many times on this channel before, get ready for some free agency fireworks next summer. And that even includes a scenario in which many of the star players aren't available. In that case, middle tier guys like Chris Middleton and Kemba Walker could see huge deals come their way because, as we all learned in the summers of 2015 and 2016, with a large amount of league-wide cap space comes a ton of big contracts, even to players that we might not think of as worthy of those huge paychecks. And there you have it, a handful of NBA player salary facts for the 2018-19 NBA season. I hope you all enjoyed watching, and if you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Once again, my name is Tucker, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.